Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Available on Apple Podcasts and PodcastOne.
In case you haven't heard, WWE SmackDown is coming to Fox. It all kicks off on this Friday, October 4th, with a huge 20th anniversary celebration. This event is going to be lights out. Just check out this lineup of WWE superstars and legends. Roman Reigns, Sting, The Undertaker, Goldberg, Hulk Hogan, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and yours truly, Stone Cold Steve Austin. And get a load of some of these matches. Kofi Kingston defending his WWE Championship against the Beast, Brock Lesnar. Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair taking on Bayley and Sasha Banks. And Kevin Owens versus Shane McMahon and a ladder match. Oh, hell yeah. It's the greatest night of superstars the WWE has ever seen as a new era of SmackDown begins on Fox. Don't miss the premiere of Friday Night SmackDown this Friday night, October 4th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, only on Fox. And that's the bottom line.
The following program is a PodcastOne.com production. He started in a small town in Texas. Worked his ass off to become one of the most famous wrestlers of all time.
We're going to take care of business tonight, and that's the bottom line.
And now he's dominating the world of on-demand audio. And he's doing it for the working man.
This is a damn good outlet for me to spew the bullshit off my brain.
Yeah! This is Steve Austin Unleashed.
Hey, welcome to another classic episode of the Steve Austin Show. Every week, we are bringing out some of the most requested episodes of the podcast from behind the archives. We have another great one for you this week, and here's my producer, Sean, to tell you all about it.
Howdy, everybody. It is producer Sean with another classic episodes of the Steve Austin Show. 2 episodes today combined into one, episode number 214 and episode number 216 with The Franchise, Shane Douglas. Original air dates, April 23rd and April 30th, 2015. This, I believe, would be Shane's... Well, I think Shane's only been on the show, if you combine these 2 episodes, twice total. He was on the show as well a couple years ago. And Steve and Shane have a very rich history together from WCW, especially in 1993, where they wrestled each other quite a bit. Steve as a part of the Hollywood Blondes with Brian Pillman, and Shane Douglas along with his tag team with Ricky Steamboat. And they did fight over the WCW tag team title very often in 93. But we cover a lot here with Shane. Shane talks about his training with former WWF Tag Team Champion Dominic DeNucci, as well as breaking into the business with Mick Foley. Mick and Shane did train together under Dominic, and they did traverse the independent scene in the early 80s, as it were, together. So they've went their separate ways, and they've converged a few times in the same promotions. Shane also talks about going to the UWF along with Eddie Gilbert and learning under Eddie Gilbert. And he has a very interesting story about Bill Watts' reaction to one of his matches. And also Shane does talk about the Dean Douglas character that he portrayed in the WWF in 1995 and how that started by him leaving ECW to join the WWF, and how Vince McMahon pitched the character to him, and he got to watch Vince McMahon eat breakfast, and it's not as boring of a story as you would imagine. That, and Shane does talk about how the vignettes and how the character was supposed to be, and how it kind of was realized, but it wasn't, and it just didn't work out for him. He's got a lot to say about it. So you guys are going to dig this episode with Shane Douglas, one of the awesome wrestlers from the 90s ECW. Growing up in the 90s and watching ECW in like 96, 97, I mean, he was the man. This day in Steve Austin history, let's jump into it. Today being October 3rd, we start off in 1991 in Sarasota, Florida. WCW TV champion Stunning Steve Austin fought Dustin Rhodes to a draw. Then in 1992, in Harrisonburg, Virginia, it's Stunning Steve Austin defeating Z-Man Tom Zenk. Then we jump to the WWF in 1998 in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where Stone Cold Steve Austin defeats Kane, Undertaker, and Mankind in a 4-way battle. And then finally wrapped up in 2005 in Dallas, Texas. It's the Raw Homecoming to USA. They left the Spike Network to go back to the USA Network. And if you remember, that's where they had the promos where they were moving everything. Carlito was putting sand in a suitcase. But anyways, yeah, this was the Raw Homecoming coming back to the USA Network. And there was a whole in-ring segment with all the McMahons being on TV. Even Linda was there. Shane and Stephanie coming back to TV after a long while. And they're all in the ring. Steve Austin shows up because he's there to raise some hell. But Steve Austin and Vince come to odds, and eventually Vince attempts to leave, but gets hit with the stunner from Steve Austin. And then Shane shows up, and he gets a stunner. And then Stephanie comes out. She slaps Austin. She gets a stunner. And then finally, Linda McMahon shows up to have a few beers with Steve. And that's right, she ended up with a stunner. It wasn't a very good stunner, but she got a stunner. So in one night, Steve Austin stunnered 4 McMahons. And there's something too, this last part here, I don't remember this, but I guess it happened. According to my source at thehistoryofwwe.com, it says Gene Okerlund interviewed Hulk Hogan in the ring regarding his future plans, with Hogan mentioning he wanted to face off against Steve Austin. I vaguely remember there being talk about that in 2005, about there maybe being a match, but obviously that did not come to be. I believe this was the same year that Hogan ended up wrestling Shawn Michaels at the SummerSlam. But yeah, I don't remember Hogan laying out the challenge of sorts, but you know, I guess that was possibly in the plans. I got my information, of course, from thehistoryofwwe.com. All right, folks, we'll take a break and we'll come back with the franchise, Shane Douglas, on another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show.
Guys can be terrible at taking care of their health. Whether it's a knee injury, a bad back, or something worse, guys are usually more comfortable rubbing some dirt on it than seeing a doctor. The same is true for erectile dysfunction. Studies show 70% of guys who experience ED don't get treated for it. Thankfully, our friends at Roman have created an easy way to chat with the doctor online about ED and getting it taken care of. With Roman, there are no waiting rooms, awkward face-to-face conversations, or uncomfortable trips to the pharmacy. Roman lets you handle everything discreetly online. All you have to do is visit GetRoman.com/Austin and fill out a brief medical onboarding. Then just talk to a doctor and you'll get medication delivered to your door in a discreet, unmarked packaging with free 2-day shipping. Just for listeners of The Steve Austin Show, go to GetRoman.com/Austin for a free online visit and free 2-day shipping. Find out what will work for you when it comes to overcoming ED. It is definitely worth your time. One more time, that's GetRoman.com/Austin for your free online medical visit and 2-day shipping. Check it out.
This is Steve Austin Unleashed.
Explain to me the legend of Bruno Sammartino from a kid that grew up in the Pittsburgh area, because obviously I know who Bruno is, but I was down in South Texas. Wrestling was very regional back then, so, of course, I always heard of the legend of Bruno Sammartino, and, of course, I know all of his accomplishments, and, you know, he was just a tremendous asset to the business, one of the biggest stars of all time. How over was the guy back then when you were a kid?
Well, I'll start current and go back. If I go up to Permani Brothers, which is a sandwich shop where you get the coleslaw and french fries on the sandwich, a famous sandwich shop up in the Strip District in Pittsburgh. If I go there tonight and I walk in, the first thing is, "Hey, franchise, how you doing?" And the second thing is, "How's the legend? How's Bruno Sammartino?" He could run for mayor of Pittsburgh today and win in a landslide.
Right.
Just a genuine nice guy. But in Pittsburgh growing up, we had the Steelers, of course. And then there was a run with the Pirates years before the Penguins ever got good. And we had Bruno Sammartino. He was part of that triumvirate of things that we paid attention to here in Pittsburgh. And he was a huge part of the cultural fabric that was Pittsburgh at that time.
So then at what point do you say to yourself, I've got to be a pro wrestler. I've got to find a guy to trade me. Ultimately, you find Dominic DeNucci, who also trained Mick Foley, probably about a year down the road after you come through. So what was it when the light went off in your head and said, hey, I got to do this?
I was at it's crazy that you remember this stuff. I was at my sister's house, my sister and brother-in-law's house. I was babysitting for them. They both worked midnight shifts. And they had 2 young kids, my nephew and niece, Sammy and Stephanie, and they were 3-4 years old. They were about a year apart. And they weren't sleeping. I was reading wrestling magazines. And they had a picture in the back where you could send in and get a mask of Mr. Wrestling 2. And I remember something about that article grabbed my attention. And right prior to that time, we had built, my friends and I had seen a picture in Pro Wrestling Illustrated of a kid that had got his picture in the paper or in the magazine because he had built this ring. It was really sorry looking. You know, the ropes were drooping, there were strings hanging off them, and there was a carpet for the mat. And my friends and I were all pretty handy. We thought, well, we can build a better ring than that. And so we did. We set out to build a ring, and a couple of weeks later, we've got this pretty impressive-looking ring in the backyard, which we fooled around in for a couple of weeks. And then, so now what are we going to do? At the time, you're in the same age. There was a time when Muscular Dystrophy Associations got kids put on backyard carnivals to raise $5-10 to send into MDA. And I had gone and met a woman named Angeline Paparella, who was a local chairwoman of the local chapter of the Muscular Dystrophy Association. This woman, Steve, was a courageous human being. She was a nurse who had contracted adult onset muscular dystrophy, was totally immobile but for a few fingers. And to say that woman worked tirelessly to defeat muscular dystrophy is an understatement.
Right.
She's of course long since been passed away, but we went over to meet her. Well, I was in 8th grade at the time, and my friends were in 7th. They were a year behind me. And I think she was so enamored by the idea of kids this age wanting to do something. We wanted to put on a backyard wrestling show.
Right.
And so she called me up one day and she said, there's a wrestler that lives locally. It's an Italian name. Well, of course, it's Bruno Sammartino. And she said, no, it's not Bruno. And she couldn't remember Dominic DeNucci's name, but she told Dinarini, Dominuni, or she's going through all these incarnations. I said, Dominic DeNucci, who was world tag team champ at the time with Dino Bravo. And she said, yeah, that's it. Dominic DeNucci. And she put me in touch with Dominic, who said that he'd make an appearance that day if he was in town. As fate would have it, he was in town that day, and he swung by, and I can still remember in my mind's eye. I can still see him getting out of the car. He had this huge white LTD, and he got out. And I remember just thinking, as a kid in 8th grade, 13, 14 years old, I saw this huge, what looked like a massive chest getting out of the car, and he came down. What we had done at that time is, much like the kids do today, we had rehearsed our matches. We had we had written the script for each match.
God damn it, Shane, you're killing me. This is probably 81 or 80, and you're already scripting a match. This is not the Shane Douglas I knew in WCW. We were calling everything in the ring. Please continue.
But that's how we did it, and Dominic got involved in a couple of the matches. I think he was really taken back, and seeing kids go out and really did a good job of putting on a show. We ended up drawing about 50 people to the show and drew a couple $100.
That's awesome.
And then after the show, we were out front of my friend's father owned the bar, and he allowed us to set this up at the back. We were out front taking a picture, a group photo. My brother-in-law took photos that day, and Dominic asked us how old we were. And I said, I'm 14, how old are you? And he laughed, and he said, you never ask a wrestler how old they are. And he told me that day he was 48. And my guess is he was probably lying to me then, but Dominic's still around and kicking, still in phenomenal shape, and one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life, and I'm blessed to have known him and been trained by him.
Long story short, what was his training camp like? My time with Chris Adams, we were basically doing a lot of tumbling, a lot of flat back, stuff, slapping the mat, and just a modicum of chain wrestling. Maybe you're going to be the same story as mine, really is more on the job training. It was a foot in the door. I basically learned the basics. And I wasn't smartened up until my first match at the Sportatorium on live television. So how long was this camp? What were you guys focusing on?
Well, Dominic didn't have any length to his camp. When you paid to go, which he never charged me. I'll tell you that story a little bit. But I would go. He had me get to the school early. I'd get there we started at 7 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays, and I'd get there about 5:30, 6 o'clock, and clean his school up and make sure everything was clean, the ropes were tight and the ring was cleaned out, that sort of thing. He would start off, we would do a lot of calisthenics, a lot of running the ropes, a lot of stuff for wind. And then Dominic was real expensive on the chain wrestling because he had been a silver medalist in Olympic trials in 1956 for Italy.
Oh,
and
wow.
would have gone, except back then you had to pay your own way. And, of course, he came from a very poor family, didn't have money, that's why he emigrated. And so he was extensive on chain wrestling, and it was a natural for me because I had an extensive amateur background, and so it was a smooth transition for me. Although Dominic would he never roughed us up like I hear these stories of other people hear him at sort of break your leg or do this or do that.
Right.
Dominic never did that, but he'd rough you up just enough to let you know he was in charge.
Right.
And ran a pretty tight school. And fortunately, about a year later or so, Mick came, and we had a couple other guys around the school. A guy named Dave Kilbansky and a guy named a guy that became Cody Michaels, Mark Keenan. We had some pretty good people to work with there, and the four of us usually got in the ring. And I remember about 7, 8 o'clock at night, it'd be pitch black outside, and Dominic would tell us, "Get the fuck out of the ring! I gotta get home." And we just really soaked it up. We loved it. We just indulged ourselves in professional wrestling.
So were you wrestling, doing local shows? I mean, because, or was UWF your first stop? And if so, how did you get there?
Well, UWF, I believe, was in 85. Through my college years, 82 to 86, until I left to go to UWF, I was wrestling on the weekends, not every weekend, but 2-3 times a month at least. Dominic would have shows or be connected to shows in Lorain, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, West Virginia, down in Charleston, and Fairmont, West Virginia. My first professional match was in Fairmont, West Virginia, Thanksgiving Day, 1982. And same thing. Dominic never smartened any of us up. And Mick Foley and I once Mick came, he'd always put me and Mick in the curtain jerk, the first match.
Yep.
And Mick and I are standing in the hallway at the Warren, Ohio. Strange how it goes full circle, back to Warren, Ohio again. And Mick and I are standing in the armory. We're standing in the hallway getting ready to go out for the match. And somebody yells kayfabe. Well, as silly as it might sound, I honestly thought, and so did Mick, that somebody was yelling for a woman named Kay. And, so we just kept right on talking. And
the two guys that are about to go out there and work a match together are watching the matches, and someone yells kayfabe. Okay, continue.
Yeah. Bruno Sammartino's in the dressing room, Johnny Valiant, the Samoans.
Oh, wow, hell of a crew.
Yeah, from Dominic and Bruno's generation. And somebody yells kayfabe again, louder and a little bit more terse. And Mick and I pay no attention to it.
Oh, my.
I remember thinking at the time, somebody's looking for this bitch named Kay and you can't find her, and they're going to be pretty pissed off here in a second. Dominic comes walking over with those big mitts of his and smacks us both in the ear and pulls us by the ear to the shower and goes, in his broken English, he's been here for longer than I've been alive, and he still can't speak English.
Yeah.
He said, "You two superstars, I think you're so special you don't have to kayfabe." And I said, "Dominic, I don't know who this lady kayfabe is." And he went to smack me again, and I covered my hands up. I said, "Why do you keep hitting me?" And he said, "You don't know what kayfabe is?" He said, "It means get the fuck away from the guy you're working with. There's an outsider in the dressing room."
Right.
And that's how Mick Foley and I learned what kayfabe meant.
And kayfabe has many different connotations. You can be sitting there and have a conversation, hey, kayfabe. Or, just and to the point, your story. Kayfabe can be an adjective, it can be a verb, it can be a noun.
That's right.
You're smarter than I am. It can be many things. So, but you're doing this local stuff. I'm assuming you're working as a babyface.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, the business back then, if you were a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, you were going to be a babyface. The idea of a heel looking like that didn't exist in those days. Okay,
let's go to UWF, because you probably learned a lot from Bill Watts. I would imagine your stay there wasn't too long, and also how connected or how close did you become to Eddie Gilbert at this time?
Well, Eddie Gilbert's actually giving him a break in the business. Dominic had called. He was good friends with Bill Watson. Bill was trying to go national at the time with the UWF to compete with Vince, as Vince launched the WWF. And so Dominic started running shows up in this area, and he sent a hell of a crew up. He sent Chris Adams, who Eddie Gilbert, Terry Taylor, Missing Link, Buddy Robert, Bill Irwin, I was going to say Scott Irwin, Bill Irwin, and Dark Journey and Missy Hyatt. So sent a hell of a crew up, and they worked the second half of the show. And we opened up the show with Dominic's students, one of the last days, Terry Taylor and Eddie Gilbert pulled me and Mick Foley aside out back at Clarksburg, West Virginia, in the Armory there, the Nathan Goff Arena, and said, had you ever thought about being professional wrestlers? And I'm sure you were much like we were. We never thought we were good enough to be professional wrestlers. It was okay to goof around locally, but we weren't that good.
Right.
Eddie had ended up calling me about 2 weeks later, which coincided with the time that I graduated from college, and my school loans were coming due. I had about 2 months left of my deferment on my school loans. I didn't have any way to begin to paying them back, and the economy was sucking at the time. So I packed the car up and I went. Mick was supposed to come in with me, but right afterward, Bill, I literally got in right as they closed the door because Bill put on a hiring freeze. Bill Watts, that is, put on a hiring freeze. He was having financial trouble and subsequently having to sell the company for. And Mick ended up getting frozen out and had to go another route, but he was supposed to be right behind me. And so Eddie played a huge part in the early part of my career.
Well, how long were you there in the UWF?
It was a little over a year. I left there. The NWA had called, and Brad and trying to think. No, I was there to the end of the UWF. It was about a year, and Jim Crockett had bought it, and there was a momentous night or non-momentous night, or whatever the adjective would be, that NWA wrestlers were pitted against the UWF wrestlers, and all the UWF wrestlers were squashed out except for Sting and Steiner, who had deals with Crockett to go in to the NWA.
What did you think about Bill Watts?
Looking back, and even at the time, I remember the first night I worked in UWF. I came back to the curtain. I worked with Eddie Gilbert the first night on TV, and I came back to the curtain, and Bill was standing there, a little bit to the left of the dressing room door. And I walked to the curtain, and he's got his hands on his hips. Now, Bill's a pretty big, imposing guy. As I walked towards the dressing room door, I went to walk past him, and he said, "What the fuck was that?" And I stopped dead in my tracks, not sure if he was ribbing me. My thinking at that moment was he was ribbing me. My first night in, I'm going to get ribbed. And so I looked at him, and I gave him this little nervous grin, ready to say something. And Stevie came at me like a dog to a bone, and pinned me against the wall, screaming at me. And I was pissed off and scared, but the level of his voice, I thought he was going to come to get my bag and get out on fire. He was pretty hot.
What was he hot about?
Well, I started listening to what he was saying. He wasn't just yelling to yell. He was yelling, "Never turn your back on your opponent. You don't do this, and find a goddamn camera." He was yelling directions at me.
Right.
And I picked up on that pretty quickly. And so from that point forward, I knew sort of how to stay out of Bill's way and to not get his wrath. And any time he came at me like that, I paid attention. We all make a million mistakes. I tried like hell not to make any of them twice. That was the big thing with Bill.
All right, you're over in the Mid-South Territory. Bill Watts is running it. You're a white meat babyface. You're a prime candidate for someone to get some heat on. So
sure.
I'm imagining you took your fair shellackings in. My question is, when you go to wrestling school like I did, Chris Adams taught me how to take a bump, taught me to do a little bit of chain wrestling, and how to tumble. What he didn't teach me was how to make a blade. I would imagine that at some point in Mid-South, you got busted open. Am I correct?
A couple times, not many. A couple times, but it was always hard way in Mid-South.
Okay. Well, I heard a lot of that was going on. And, dude, and you know better than anybody, Bill loved big guys. I was a big guy territory, but also, guys like yourself, blonde, blue-eyed, good-looking guys get some heat on, or his babyface. And, of course, rock and roll was extremely successful there when they went there. But back to the task at hand. If it wasn't a hard way, who taught you how to make your first blade?
Eddie Gilbert in Continental. We were wrestling in Birmingham out at the fairgrounds because the Bow Arena was being renovated at that point. And he came to me, and this is when they first started doing the Lord Humongous, Shane Douglas Dean Cousins, which is Sid Vicious, obviously. And he had started the storyline and had been playing it. We didn't really know where it was going. He hadn't yet revealed that Sid was supposed to be my cousin. And there was a match one night where he set it up to where Sid got to the building late, and I was going to be out there wrestling the Moondogs. And we were going to forfeit the match, and I said, "No, I'll go out and wrestle it myself." And went out, and he's telling me in the back, the drink some whiskey beforehand. You got to take a whole bunch of aspirin. You got to do this, got to do that. And he showed me how to make it. And so I got the first time not having any idea what I'm doing, and had a bloodbath out there. I'm running up and down the hall before the match. I get my blood flowing, and the young and dumb kid, and bled like a stuck pig out there.
So how was that first go-around? I remember one time, I think I was wrestling. Someone asked me this question the other day, was I ever a guy who took some aspirin? And that's the big thing with the aspirin is it thins your blood so it lets you bleed a little bit easier. Your blood doesn't coagulate as quick or clot up, whatever the deal is. So anyway, I took about 4 aspirin on an empty stomach. And boy, you talk about a gut bomb. And that night, Shane, I had made my blade a little bit too long. By the time I went to go get some color, and this is on pay-per-view, I mean, I couldn't get in. And so basically, at the end of the match, I had a little bit of color, and it looked like a chicken had got on my forehead and just kind of peeled out. You talk about pissed off, and, because I was mad at myself for not making a great blade. But, it really is an interesting activity to partake in. If, obviously most of the people who listen to this show have never gotten color, and I would never recommend you to do so. But, you make that hatchet and, with a good point on it, and always drug, with the grain. And, when you first pop that thing in, you hear that kind of little pop or maybe a little gristle or it's just breaking that tissue, and then you just a little drag, and then boom, there you go. And it was funny because, Shane, back in the day, you being as smart as you were, almost going to medical school, back in, the early 80s, you don't even question the safety factor of swapping blood with another guy in a ring. I mean, it was almost, you did it with honor because, you were trying to facilitate an angle, get somebody hot, get your angle hot, make the story more interesting than it was already going to be, to add this color because it's like coloring a picture. That red, can really mean something. So out of all the times you got color, did it ever bother you? Because whenever I got the green light to get it, I was always game to do it. Yeah.
I think to myself, as I've been making the blade, the fuck are you doing? It seemed like a million miles away, but I was anything I've ever done in my life, and I'm sure you're the same way, most guys that ascend in the business, I think, have the same ethic. If you commit to something, you commit to 1,000%. And so if I was going to be a wrestler, by God, I was going to be the best damn wrestler I could be. I wasn't going to be half-assed, or if I wasn't any good, I wasn't going to stick around. I just always wanted to be the best at whatever I did. And the way we came up in the business, that's how we did business. And, like you said, it was almost with a thought of honor. It never bothered me until, I would say, right around the time of ECW, when it was becoming so egregious that to me it was just there was no point to it. It was right. There's air in the room. Okay, well, there's blood in the ring in ECW. It didn't really much matter. And it didn't elevate the match. As I was watching them from the dressing room, I'd watch the monitor, and I wouldn't see what I thought should evoke a response in the crowd. Right. I wasn't seeing that. So I made the conscious decision there to not do it. And it was the first time I remember thinking to myself, this is several years after the whole AIDS thing started, which happened right around the outset of my career, thinking to myself, this isn't safe. There's another guy bleeding, and so I sort of commenced in ECW that if I was going to bleed in the ring that night, that nobody else would in the match with me, because it was going to be me or nobody. And, it's funny how the ECW fans now, looking back at it, how they hold such reverence for it, because I remember at the time I took a ton of heat. The fans said, oh, you're a pussy, you're afraid. It had nothing to do with that. It meant nothing. And if I was going to do it, if I was going to disfigure myself, I was going to sort of make sure it made sense and evoked some response in the audience. I didn't want to just do it to do it. I never endeavored to have the dusty forehead. I wanted to, people always talk about leaving a good-looking corpse. Now I have the thought that I don't leave an old dried-up, hideous corpse behind, but I certainly didn't want the hamburger forehead.
I never really understood, with, I guess Dusty was a guy who did some vertical cutting. Abby certainly did. I never did understand the guys who went vertical. It was big in Puerto Rico as well, kind of a regional thing. Yeah. Man, the way, the skin on your forehead is, go with the grain, and it's going to scar less. And so, and again, you can look at my forehead today, and I got color on several occasions. I got fortunate to have good skin, make good cuts, and it is what it is. But I just, the idea, as as interesting with the slight bit of pain that goes with the horizontal, the vertical, has got to be times 10. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, same here. I never got it. We had a kid one time, and this is way back before I even got my break in UWF. We're wrestling in a place called Poco, West Virginia. And the reason I remember it so well is on the high school gymnasium wall, they had their mascot, which was the polka dots. P-O-C-A dots.
Jesus Christ.
You need to find something a little bit more intimidating than a polka dot. But there was a kid named Irish Mike McGee who wanted to cut that night, wanted the blade. And Dominic looked at him like he was nuts. There were like 100, 150 people in the audience. What the fuck's the matter with you? And he told him no. He said, you can't use a blade. So we're getting ready to go to the ring, and he's digging through the garbage can. This is back in the day when they showed the pull tabs on the beer cans and pop cans. He's digging through the garbage and found a pop tab, or a beer tab, pop tab, whichever one it was.
Yeah.
And took that to the ring and scarred himself up with. And I remember him saying in the dressing room with me and Mick and the rest of us in Dominic's school, you know, I want to have that forehead. And I go, well, geez, man, it's not necessarily my thinking, but, you know, apparently some do.
So he wanted to look like a grizzled vet.
Yeah.
Let's hear from our friends at Zorro.com, because they are here to make your life easier. If you're out there trying to fix up your office or your shop and you're driving all over around town looking for the stuff you need, forget that. Zorro.com, spelled Z-O-R-O, is where you'll find everything you need for businesses of any size in almost any industry. Electrical, plumbing, contracting, manufacturing. Don't sweat it, because Zorro has you covered. Zorro.com has tools and equipment, safety and office supplies, cleaning gimmicks, and more from brands you know and trust, such as Stanley, 3M, Milwaukee, Schneider, and Rubbermaid, just to name a few. Zorro.com offers amazing customer service from real people based in the U.S., and you'll dig the fast, free shipping on orders of $50 or more. Just for listeners of the Steve Austin Show, visit Zorro.com/Austin to sign up for a Z-Mail and get 15% off your first order. Again, that's Zorro.com/Austin for 15% off your first order. Zorro.com/Austin. Get it all in one place. All right, all you pro wrestling fans, listen up. A fellow WWE Hall of Famer and one of the greatest to ever step between the ropes, Jerry the King Lawler, is coming to Podcast One with the Jerry Lawler Show. Join the King and his co-host, Sean Reedy, as they get together to reflect on Jerry's legendary career, from Memphis to the WWE to just about everywhere else. Jerry will share his thoughts on the current wrestling product and might even have a few guests stop by. Download new episodes of the Jerry Lawler Show every Friday on Apple Podcast and Podcast One. And if you love the show, tell your friends and leave a rating and review. That would be badass.
This is Steve Austin Unleashed.
I want to talk just a little bit more about the impact that Eddie Gilbert had on you, because, you know, I met Eddie, you know, going through USWA real briefly, but I didn't know the guy. Was he as brilliant of a, did he have as brilliant of a mind as everybody said he did?
I thought so. He certainly seemed it to me. I mean, he was a guy that was not blessed, you know, to be a 6'4",
right,
300-pound guy. You know, Eddie was, you know, not much smaller than that, but Eddie had grown up in the business. His dad, of course, Tommy Gilbert, had been in the business and had been around from his time, you know, knee-high to a grasshopper. And he was one of those guys that really absorbed it, understood it. You know, he understood the nuances of our business, which I think are sadly missing today, that elevate something from being good to being special. And, you know, Eddie was, I mean, let's face it, you know, I'm sure if you saw tapes of Mick Foley and Shane Douglas at that point, you know, I certainly wouldn't have seen the talent. You know, it was, he saw it from a mile away. And others, you know, it was, Eddie had a love of this business. You know, I'm one of the guys, I don't know how you are, Steve, but I love the business. I can watch it 24 hours a day when it's done properly. But when I'm off camera, when I'm off at home, I don't want to be Shane Douglas. I want to be Troy Martin and do my deal. And, you know, there are those guys in the business that could spout any, you know, like Jim Cornette could tell you on what date this match took place 30 years ago, what the outcome was, how long the match went. I don't know it that well. I'm just a huge fan of the business, huge mark. And, you know, and I came from that aspect. But Eddie, for me, you know, will always hold a special place. I think in large part because he died so young, but also because he gave him a break in the business. And,
right.
And just and when you go to the ring and work with him, it was effortless. It was like monkey see, monkey do.
Right.
Simon says do this, Simon says do that. And you come out not even knowing what the hell you did right or wrong, but you had a hell of a match. That was Eddie Gilbert.
Right. You said a very interesting thing there. You could watch professional wrestling all day long when it's done right. And many of your interviews, you're not real happy with the state of wrestling right now. Tell me your thoughts on today's product. And this is not a bashing session. This is you speaking candidly and us discussing what's going on. Two cats.
I always preface this question with my answer with, it ain't the kids' fault. The kids today, I watch the kids and I think, my God, I wish I had that kind of athleticism when I was that age. I'm astounded at what they can do physically. Again, it's probably unfair in the sense that I grew up watching old school wrestling. So, at the time that I was watching the Bruno Sammartinos and the Harley races and, the Jake Roberts and as a kid in the dressing room working with some of those guys, I was always astounded at how professional they were when they got to when it came time to set the match up. You and I got the privilege of working with Steamboat. And how he used to do. He'd put a chew in, get a cup of coffee, walk around for an hour, and then he'd sit us down and say, okay, here, we got it. You could see the time that he put in. He was professional from start to finish. And that was what I'd always seen in the business. When I watch today, I don't see any of the storytelling and those little tiny nuances. Like Steamboat used to tell us, it's the small things that makes the big things count.
Right.
Today, I watch the kids go out, and my God, the effort they put in, a million%. I mean, it's astounding the energy that they're putting into it. But I can watch a honky-tonk man match from 30 years ago and get more entertainment out of that. And again, taking nothing away from the kids or whatever, this is what they're being directed to do. I don't know with that kind of micromanagement. I'm certain that the franchise character could never have developed out of that kind of micromanagement. Like you said, you had a chip on your shoulder. When I went to ECW and Eddie left and Paul Heyman took over and gave me the idea for the franchise character, I ran with that thing, but there was so much venom in me from all the shit that I'd seen in the business that he had a guy that had 11 years experience on top working as a World Tag Team Champ with Ricky Steamboat who knew the business and knew everything that was wrong with it as well. And he tapped into that, and he gave me an open forum. He certainly didn't give me a teleprompter.
So your stay in down there in WCW, let's call it, when you and Steamboat were world tag teams, and y'all got those belts from Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham, I struggled to find that damn match on YouTube so I could watch it. Watched a couple of our old matches, and of course, man, when me and Brian teamed up as Hollywood Blondes, we were basically an interim tag team that they'd put together just to get guys over. And we ended up starting to get over in the process. And of course, man, we worked a million matches with you guys. And I remember working one time, and we were talking about this the other day on the phone. We were working some building in the middle of nowhere. You might be able to set the story up or tell it better than I can, but it was snowing like a sumbitch. It was just storming, and hardly anybody showed up. And I don't know how many minutes we worked, but it was a long-ass match trying just to put some time in so people can get there and they could have the other matches. Do you remember that night?
I do remember it well. It was 93, March of 93. I can't remember the exact date. A second ago I said, Cornette came in there, and I couldn't. Now here I am doing it. It was in March of 93. That was when the big blizzard came up the coast and socked everything in by 3 feet of snow. I remember driving up that night. I flew in. Steamboat was driving down from Charlotte in I had a big diesel Mercedes. And I flew into Atlanta and drove up, and we met. It was at a little building. I remember working at that one time. And I was in the back. We were on later in the show, and I remember there was no snow on the ground before the show started. At intermission, I went outside to make a cell phone call when they were in their infancy to call home to my wife and to find out how bad the snow was there and stuff. And there was about 6-7 inches on the ground already at that point. So in half a wrestling match, there was half a wrestling show. There was a 6-7 inches of snow, and about right after the show restarted after the intermission, I started hearing like car doors opening and closing, and you could see headlights pulling away from the building. And we went out to the ring. I counted from the apron that night. There were 28 people in the ring in the arena that watched me and Ricky wrestle you and Brian. And you're right. I think we went up about 45, 50 minutes that night. That was you guys used to be effortless to work with. That's the thing when people always ask about those days. I remember it never seemed like work. You know, it just seemed like we were going to have a hell of a good time, and with you especially, and I'm trying to blow smoke up your ass, I remember like I used to do that backward blind back body press. And when you'd shoot me to that turnbuckle, some people I'd hesitate for a second to make sure they were going to be there. With you, I always knew that you were going to be exactly on time. And so I just hit it and shoot it blind and never once missed it with you.
It was always a blast working with you guys because you had two great technicians. You had two white meat baby faces. You could get the heat on either one. I mean, we could flip a coin in the back. We're going to get heat on Steamer tonight. We're going to get heat on Shane because you are both in the same ballpark with just as far as the just outrageous great selling. And then as far as the comeback goes, both of you had tremendous fire. So, I mean, me and Brian were like in hog heaven. It was one of those deals where it's like, what's the card? Oh, we got Steamboat and Douglas again. It's a night off. So those are some great days. And I ran into a little political BS, you know, at one time there. You know, they were going to split. Well, they did split Brian and I up, and they were going to give me a singles run as a U.S. champion with Harley Race as my manager, which I really was looking forward to. And I'll never forget, I think it was down there in Dothan, Alabama, when little Brian Pillman comes up to me and goes, "Kid, we got to come up with a finish move. We're a tag team now." I said, "Bullshit, we're a tag team. They're fixing to give me a singles run with fucking Harley Race as a U.S. heavyweight champion." And I went and talked to Dusty, and then Dusty broke it down. He goes, "No, baby, we're going to put you guys in a tag team. It'll be great." So anyway, we got a chance to work with you guys a lot, and we had a lot of fun. What was your exit strategy when you left WCW and ended up going to Eastern Championship Wrestling, which would become Extreme Championship Wrestling? How were they able to talk you out of, a pretty good paying gig at WCW, solid company, and going back to Philly?
Well, they didn't have to. I'd already quit. I had it, I was one of those guys that never really liked the politics of wrestling, and I just never had a stomach for it. And when I hurt my shoulder, I'm forgetting what match it was, but I hurt my shoulder and had to have a quick little surgery, an arthroscope done on my shoulder, and I was going to be off about 2 or 3 weeks. And that was the time frame when they put Ricky Steamboat under the hoods with, I don't know which one played which on which day, but it was Tom Zank and Brad Armstrong.
Right.
Played the Shane Douglas role, neither of which, they both had waists the size of a thimble, and I certainly never had that waist. It was pretty obvious. And they wanted to drop the belts, and I kept telling Dusty, just give me 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be back, we'll do it right. And they went and did that. But Steamboat, being the eternal professional that he is, if you watch the night that they dropped the belts, he jumps up and pulls his hood off. And that was his cue that that wasn't him that got pinned, and it wasn't Shane Douglas, because Shane would have taken his mask off too.
Right.
And I was at the grocery store, and a guy came about midnight. I always go late so I don't run to Mark's and stuff and slow you down. But I was walking to the grocery store, and this guy up every aisle keeps looking at me really strange. About the third or fourth time he passes me, goes, "I just saw you on a pay-per-view earlier tonight." And he told me the match. I didn't even see the match. I didn't watch it at home. And he told me, I said, "Well, that certainly wasn't me, because Muhammad Ali was only quick enough to turn the light switch off and get in bed before the light went out." I said, "I've gotten from Atlanta, Georgia to Pittsburgh in about a half an hour."
Yeah.
But it just turned me off, Steve. It was, it was just like for some way to try to make Shane Douglas look bad for whatever reason. Apparently, I was up somebody's rear end that week. And I went home and started teaching school at the time. Actually, I'm wrong. I went to the WWF. It was, I went up to WWF for about a year stay after I left WCW, and went from there, quit and taught school from 91 to 93 when ECW started. And in ECW, Eddie Gilbert started the place. It was Eastern Championship Wrestling. Started as the booker. He called me. I told this story the other day. He called me several times, and I was so turned off by the business. I kept saying, "Thanks, Eddie, but no, I'm not interested, not interested." And he called back 3-4 days later, and he bumped the price up $25 or $50 a night. And he kept doing that. And I finally said, "It has nothing to do with that. I'm just not interested in coming back to the business." And
you were that burned out. You were.
Yeah, I was, and I had a good job. My dad was sick with emphysema at the time, and I was spending time with him, and he couldn't live alone. And So I was really happy to be off the road. And, I've been on the road for the better part of the last, 10, 12 years. And, was happy being home and just was in no mood to go back to the bullshit that was professional wrestling, the politics of professional wrestling. And Eddie finally said to me, how about we let you be the lead heel for the company? And that roped me in because I'd never been given a chance to be a heel, although Bill Watts had seen it years before. And Eddie Gilbert saw it whenever he was assisting in WCW, and they had me and Tony Ace pulling the Dynamic Dudes. So there was some thought prior to that, but Eddie was the first to give me the opportunity to do it, and that's what roped me going back into wrestling.
So you end up going to ECW, Eastern Championship, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it, ECW, and Eddie's going to be the booker, but they yanked the book from Eddie, and then all of a sudden Paul E's got it.
Yeah. I was there. I was sitting in the production meetings for the first couple weeks, and the second or third week I went back, no Eddie. Doug was there and pulled me aside, Doug Gilbert, Eddie's brother, and said, Eddie's not coming back. And I said, what happened? And he wouldn't talk about it, and then Paul started the meeting, and became pretty seamless. It just was, at that time, I was told that Eddie wasn't interested in staying, and he left. And it was shortly after that, very shortly after that, he was found dead in Puerto Rico. I don't remember exactly how long, but within months, he was dead in Puerto Rico. And Paul Heyman was building what would become Eastern Championship or Extreme Championship Wrestling.
How did the death of Eddie Gilbert impact you then, and then looking forward, or now looking back through what you went through with the OxyContin, and coupled with the fact that, Jesus Christ, I don't know how many guys that you and I both know that we were good friends with, or had worked with, or buds with, because we're in the inner circle of pro wrestling that have passed on. How does his death impact you?
It hit me pretty hard at the time because, like I said, he gave me my break in the business,
right.
and without him, I certainly would have never been seen in ECW or anywhere else with Steamboat or anyplace else. So, I always had a special place for Eddie in my heart. And probably would have followed just about anywhere. I was one of those guys, especially at that time, I was oblivious to Eddie having any kind of a problem. I would see him at times, be sleepy looking or whatever, but, as much as we were driving on the road, that didn't really, strike a chord in me. And I was shocked when I got the phone call because I was so oblivious to that in Eddie. Now looking back and knowing the story as best I can possibly know it, and with what I've been through, like you said, I think to myself, there before the grace of God, because, like you said, it's happened so often. It's such a recurring theme in our business that, if it could happen to him, I always took Eddie as being like a really smart guy. And so I thought, if that could have happened to him, it certainly could have happened to me and should have happened to me. So, he was, just like you said, one of the ones that's gone way too soon. The business could sort of use today.
How many times you look back, and I've talked with one of my guys that I'm pretty friendly with, and say, you know what, I could have been one of those guys, because I probably could have. I wasn't in the straits that a lot of people were, but I put myself in harm's way enough. You ever stop and think about, your boys growing up without dad? Had you been a statistic?
Yeah, it's a hell of a guilt trip, there's a huge part of it, not to sound sappy or corny and certainly anti-franchise-ish, but, I get up today, I notice the sunrise and the sunset, I smell the flowers, and I certainly marvel in my kids every day. It's like I've been given a special gift, that you shouldn't be here and yet still are, and, have a unique opportunity that so many of our friends and brothers don't have, so I try to make as much of every day as I can because, my mother used to say, my mother was huge on church and everything, and she used to say, tomorrow's promised to no man, and how many times we've seen that in this business. So, I try to make sure I see something special and get something out of each and every day because I'm appreciative for each and every one.
You brought up the franchise. Let's talk about the franchise. One of my favorite characters of all time, and your promos were peerless at the time. You was on such a roll, such a head of steam. How long did it take you to fully morph into that persona, having never been a heel before? A story you told me yesterday as we were shooting the breeze on the phone, you had cut a promo, I guess, as Shane Douglas down there in WCW, I guess when he had the book, and he said that was a stone-cold promo, and you looked at him like, no, blonde-haired, blue eyes, I'm not a heel, I'm a babyface. So, but, and it's like I was talking to you on the phone as well. I mean, I always loved your babyface work just because you're so fun to work with. Fire, technicality, sell, everything. But your heels, I always took you for a heel promo too. But when you evolved into the franchise thing, full of this vitriol, piss and vinegar and disdain and arrogance for everything, dude, you were cutting some of the most riveting, straight to the bone promos that had ever been cut. Where did that come from?
A lot of it, if you fall in a pile of shit and come out with a golden horse, you can already say you're brilliant. For us in ECW, honestly, one of the biggest. First of all, I knew how to do a promo. I had quite experience in ECW, in WCW, and to some lesser extent, less spectacularly in UWF. But so I wasn't uncomfortable with the time cues and the time, countdowns and things. I could get in and out on cue. But the vitriol that you mentioned, that it came from all the politics I'd seen in the business, and that was the first time. The first time I went to the ring to do a promo, Paul gave me 5 minutes, and I said, "What do you want to talk about?" He said, "Whatever you want." I said, "Well, give me something to talk about," and so whatever you want. And so I was sort of thrown to the wolves. ECW Arena, I'll let everybody know a little secret, wasn't the greatest arena in the world. It
was a shithole. No, and I say that with respect and affection.
Right, that's the same here. And but our sound system was so bad that even us in this conversation we've been having on your show, it was something I was talking on down about it, so it came through very muffled. So you had to slow everything down to make it make sense.
Right.
And that's where I sort of found my pace in that character that sort of most people, I think, would looking back on it, look at like as being arrogant or, obviously that was a big part of the character, but that came from that necessity of having to speak slowly, or it just came through as a bunch of muffled nothing on the sound speaker. And so all those things confluenced at one point where, I was full of piss and vinegar to the business and anger and vitriol, and I had the sound system that I had to work with. But I also was put in a spot as a top heel, and thankfully got Terry Funk to work with, who taught me a world about being a heel. And I just always thought it was the opposite of being a babyface. That's how stupid I was at the time.
Yeah.
And, just sort of wandered into it. And then luckily the business was going to a point where wrestling was on this huge upsurge. WWF was going to monstrous heights, and WCW was gaining huge ground. But there were so many eyeballs on wrestling, and the internet, thank God for the internet, because without the internet, ECW, I think, would have been a one-town company that, a few people talked about. But the internet and Bob Ryder, bless his heart, who would sit there and literally tap out each match. Shane Douglas just grabbed Steve Austin and a headlock. Steve Austin, he would type out the entire match live over the internet. And so had us out to a much larger audience than we could possibly have reached in those early days. And everything just sort of confluenced at one point. There was all that anger and the sound system and this position of being the lead heel and this experience and the internet and, it's lightning in a bottle. Mix all those ingredients together and you had nitroglycerin.
You said Terry Funk taught you, or that you put two and two together, and being a heel is not just the opposite of being a babyface. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, the babyface goes out and reacts. The way we were broken into the business, the heel called the match. He was the ring general, and you responded to what he did or didn't call for you. I had become very good at doing that part of it, but, calling the match is much different to deciding what storyline you're going to tell, what's the story you're going to tell in that particular match. If you're cognizant, like I think you were and I was in the ring, making sure that you're playing off the character that you're wrestling instead of just going out there and beating them up and doing your own thing. To me, the great match is always played off of the dynamic of Stone Cold Steve Austin versus the franchise Shane, these two iconic characters. And it'd be stupid for me to go to the ring and just eat somebody up whenever I could get so much out of the character that they've taken time to build.
Right.
And that never came into play as a babyface, obviously, and Terry Funk was the one that taught me that.
What kind of pressure did you feel going into the organization, being the lead heel? Because, dude, you guys had a hell of a damn roster, and let me see if you had Raven, Sandman was there. I guess Mick was there at that time, right?
Right, absolutely.
Jesus. Name some of the other guys, because I'm going to leave a lot of guys off the list. But what I'm saying is, man, you guys had I remember my memories of ECW were groundbreaking, shocking. Some of the greatest characters of all time, I think, were created from ECW. Very violent matches, some great matches, also some highly technical matches with the Malenkos and Benoits and the Storm and those guys.
Sure.
But it was a lot of violence. And when I went in there, I called it a lot of violent crap because I was trying to be a heel and I was calling a spade a spade. It was much more than that. But the pressure you felt trying to lead that organization with all those guys breathing down your neck, because everybody's gunning for the top spot. You know, you're brought in as a lead heel, but you've got to maintain that and set the pace.
Yeah, again, you're never into the heights you've been with and traversing the Federation. But, you know, for me in ECW, you said we had an incredibly talented roster. You know, I always thought when I was a young kid in the business that when you get to a certain point, you'll relax and be able to sit back and okay, I've made it. I never felt that in ECW. I was always looking over my shoulder at a Taz and a Tommy Dreamer and a Raven and a Sandman and a Sabu and a Terry Funk. I mean, there was a list, you know, long out the door that could certainly have carried the belt and were capable. So that was in large part the reason that drove me eventually to the OxyContin. Not that it was to blame, but I was pushing myself to such an extent that I couldn't just go out and have a match. I had to have the championship match. And in ECW, the one thing that people always talk about ECW, because the fans especially today talk about it like every night was a 5-star match. Every night was a 5-star night. Every match was a 5-star match. Every wrestler was a 5-star wrestler. And that wasn't the case. So, you know, there were a lot of stinkeroo nights, and I had a lot of them. But the thing about ECW that I was always most impressed with was no matter how good the matches were before yours, everybody always lived up to it. So if match 3 went out and tore the roof down, and Sandman was going out in match 4, he'd top that son of a bitch. And I would go out and top him. And Paul's true genius is in 2 things. A, he had an incredible dressing room of talent, and he knew how to build on their strengths and negate their weaknesses. That was the first thing. The second thing was Paul knew how to build a card. So if you were on 5th match, you knew you were there. You know, looking back, I knew I was there because he needed something to precede to go bigger than the first 4 matches and leave the door open for match 7, 8, and 9 to follow it. And for some reason, the chemistry always worked there. And, you know, he mentioned the cliques earlier that were in ECW. There were those cliques, and there were a lot of tensions along the way with different people between different, you know, wrestlers and talents and management, people in the company, management and whatnot. But the funny thing about ECW was there were several nights where fans would attack somebody. The first night I remember this happening was in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Somebody attacked Dancing with Wolves. He came running back and said, somebody just called New Jack the N-word. Without hesitation, the entire dressing room emptied out, and we went out there and beat the entire room up. The people that didn't leave. And, you know, you think about that today and the lawsuits that would ensue. But, you know, I saw it. And one night I got attacked by a fan in Allentown, and the dressing room emptied out, and it wasn't like the guys that I didn't get along with didn't come out. The entire dressing room came out and formed a circle around me and you know, protected me and got me back in the dressing room. It was a fraternity there. It was a brotherhood. And I had never seen that in wrestling. I'd heard about it from Dominic and Bruno. I'd never seen it firsthand. And I never saw it again after that. It was something special there in the chemistry that was ECW.
Let's talk about the kind of the atmosphere or the us against them mentality, which Paulie, I think it was probably almost organic. I think you all felt it. Certainly, Paulie capitalized on it. And in speaking of great promos from a person such as yourself, Paulie's no stranger to a great promo himself. If you go back to his Continental days, his stuff in the early 80s, mid-80s, whenever, Paulie could cut a great promo from day one. And so, you know, I heard about, you know, and I've seen many of his famous, you know, got to win one for the Gipper. It's us against the world,
right.
Mentality. And he certainly stirred you guys or the whole roster. And I think everybody was going to do it anyway, but he certainly stirred the pot to get everybody to go out there and give it their goddamnedest, if I can say that, just to put everything on the line. And, man, all of a sudden, I mean, the violence, the bumps, the whole shooting match just escalates into what it did.
Yeah. Paul had a way of working us into a lather, into a frenzy that you could literally feel the adrenaline. Like you said, you witnessed them that would, we all knew none of us were stupid. We knew that we were a teeny tiny company that was fighting two Goliaths, that if we were going to make any kind of inroad whatsoever, we had to go big, we had to go audacious, and we had to go balls out. There couldn't be any other way. We couldn't afford one bad arena show could have spelled the end of ECW anyway along the line. So that $36,000 is what the gate was for the ECW arena every 3 weeks. Had that building not been sold out, say we shit the bed tonight and come back 3 weeks from now, it's half full and got $18,000. That literally could have spelled the end of ECW at that point. So it was never mentioned and it was never brought up in words. We all knew it. We knew that me as the mouthpiece, for me it was, I couldn't just talk about the guy across the dressing room, across the ring. I'd then also shoot on the champions north and south and get the attention because we certainly couldn't pay for the publicity. We had to get it in other ways. And Paul, Paul's given a lot of the credit and he deserves a lot of the credit for ECW. But I think, when you look at the talent in that dressing room, anybody with any kind of sense of our business could have coached that dressing room. I'm not so certain they could have led it like Paul did.
Man, when I watched the DVD, it was called ECW Barbed Wire City. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Blue Mini, Brian Heffron sent it to me, and I enjoyed the shit out of it. But when the DVD ended and the credits rolled, I had this strange feeling about me. And it was just like, when you started going back, and you were there way longer than I was, but in its totality, man, it just took a bunch of human bodies, mashed them up and crushed them up and beat the fuck out of them, and then just, disappeared. The way the violence escalated there, Shane, in-house, organically, did the boys outwork themselves with respect to how violent the product became?
In some ways, yeah.
Because it's a work, because from when you started and training with Dom, and you're breaking in those, got some color, some hard ways there for Bill in Mid-South, but, the business is a work. And I know you guys are working, but, man, that was some stiff-ass shit that was going on.
Yeah, it got to the point where it was beginning to become a caricature of itself, and the injuries were starting to rack up. And I told you earlier there were guys that were refusing to work with, it's not just me. There were probably 6 or 7 guys in the back that were refusing to work with other people. It became, I'm sure, a headache for Paul to book. And it reached a point where, where a chair shot would evoke a huge response in the early to mid years of ECW. By the end, if you didn't take somebody's head off, if somebody put their hands up to try to lessen the blow or whatever, the fans would just shit the bed on you.
Right.
And, that said, nobody did anything there they didn't want to do.
Right.
Paul didn't micromanage. But I certainly think that we all started feeling the pressure of living up to that legend that was ECW that was much larger than any of us understood at the time. It certainly took. I remember one night there was a night in Scranton, Pennsylvania at the CYO where Terry Funk was wrestling Raven. And I pulled Paul aside earlier that night and I said, Paul, if you want this match to work, you got to be the leader tonight. Because Paul wanted to be the leader in some ways, in other ways he didn't want to. He didn't want to be the person to come tell Steve Austin, hey, you can't get color tonight or you can't break a table or whatever. And I said, you need to tell the dressing room before the show that if anybody touches a chair or a table prior to that match, they're going to be fired. And he didn't want to do it, and he didn't want to do it. Me and Taz and a bunch of us kept leaning on him. He finally did it. So to the course night, the show got over very well. And when Terry Funk and Raven brought a table into the ring, you could feel the energy just start ramping up. They knew it was going to happen.
Right.
And they did the perfect. Terry Funk and Raven both did the perfect thing. They teased it for about 20 minutes. Table just sitting in the middle of the ring doing nothing, and the fans finally they'd go to it and come away, go to it and come away. Finally, about the fifth or sixth time I went to that son of a bitch, and the place exploded, which told me that it wasn't necessary to do it 55 times a night.
Right.
They wanted to see it that one time and make it special, and it had gotten out of control at that point.
Were you there on the New Jack Blade incident with the kid?
Yes, I was there then. I sure was.
Now, from my understanding, the kid's pretty green in the business. Don't know that he really had too many matches. He wants to get color, or somebody wants to get color, but New Jack agrees to cut him. I'm under the impression there's about a 4 or 5 inch gash across the kid's forehead.
Yeah, he'd gone pretty deep and hard on the kid, but I was sitting there at the table when the kid came in. He came in with a midget wrestler. And me and Paul, and I want to say either Taz or Tommy Dreamer, was sitting at a table talking, and he came over with the midget. And I forget who the midget wrestler was. And he sat down, and the midget started talking for him and saying, this is so-and-so, and he's a good kid, and told Paul that he was experienced. And when Paul asked him if he could blade, he said he could. You know, I'm not condoning what Jack did with the blade or didn't do. I wasn't in the ring for that, but the kid bled pretty seriously, and I was there when he told Paul that he was experienced. He'd been trained by Killer Kowalski, and that he had bladed before, and the whole deal. So I'm certainly not saying that what happened to the kid deserved to happen, but and I'm not trying to protect Paul either. I'm just telling the facts as they were. Because the kid certainly let off that he knew what he was doing.
You decide at some point here you end up back in the WWF. What prompted your leaving ECW to make a return to WWF? And, that short run there, and you went home to take care of your father, and here you go back. And there's a change in the landscape because seemingly when I look back, when you go back, the clique is in full force. And it didn't seem to me from what transpired, and I was still down in WCW, that those guys liked you too much. What was break that down for me, because I know there's a lot of headaches, hassles, and horseshit for you when you went back.
Well, first of all, when I left WWF the first time, I was there for just a little under a year, just about a year, maybe 10, 11 months. We were in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I sat down with Vince to tell him. He went into a long story about his family and told me that family always comes first. I had a hell of a hand for him, that the door's always open to come back. So when this opportunity popped up in '96, up front, I am happy as a pig and shit in the ECW. I was making damn good money. I was working 2, sometimes 3 days a week. I was home 4 or 5 days a week with my wife. Really was as happy as I could be in the business. And Vince kept calling, and Jim Ross and different people in the company. And Jim Ross called me one day and said something along the lines of, opportunity sometimes doesn't ring twice. You go to yourself and your family to look into this. And so I had gone up, I think, on 5 trips on my own. And on the 6th trip, he flew me and my wife up. That's the very first time I fly up there. I'm waiting in Vince's outer office, with his secretary, and he comes out and says hello. Vince is fantastic on the cordialities and everything, and he orders a breakfast. Orders a very specific breakfast: egg white omelet, dry, no oil, fresh squeezed orange juice, coffee black, dry wheat toast. He's going, and asks me if I want anything. I'm fine with it. I've already eaten, thank you. And he asks again. I thank him again, and we go into the office. Within 90 seconds, Steve, there's a knock at the door. His secretary brings his tray in with his breakfast on it. And to this day, I don't know if he was trying to impress me that he was like the Jetsons, that he can push a button on the wall and get his breakfast. She didn't have time to walk across the hall to get the tray. It had to be under her desk. Right. That's how quickly it was. And I remember that, thinking to myself, that was strange. Then we got to these other 4 subsequent trips on my own, and I don't know what it was. I didn't want to leave ECW, and I wasn't prepared to leave. So it wasn't that I was playing him out or stretching things out. I was trying to listen to his offers, and but there was nothing there that really sunk in. And the 6th time I went up, I took my wife, and I told her beforehand. She didn't know the first thing about our business or cared about our business, but I wanted to use her as good cop, bad cop. I said, if he asks you any questions, I'm not going to tell you what to say. I want you to look him in the eye and tell him what you're thinking. And about halfway through the meeting, he said, Carla, Troy tells me that you guys share all your decisions on this. You must have some questions. What can I answer for you? And she looked at it was the only time in my entire relationship with Carla that I'd ever seen her be this forthright. She said, my husband is home 5 days a week in bed with me. ECW is the only company that's ever utilized him to his fullest potential. And he's teaching school 5 days a week and happy with that. What could you possibly offer him to walk away from all that? And he leaned across his table there in his office, and he patted her hand, and he said, Carla, you have my word as a gentleman to make your husband a very wealthy man. At which point I jumped in and I said, well, I'm sure you and I have different definitions because this is before the guaranteed contracts. He said, well, we don't guarantee money here in the World Wrestling. I always like how Vince always talks about the World Wrestling Federation as the ultimate universe. We here in the World Wrestling Federation don't guarantee contracts, and
right,
et cetera. And he said, but it's not uncommon for somebody in the position we're putting you in to make a guaranteed base salary of $350,000 to $550,000 a year, plus your pay-per-views, plus your merchandise.
Dude, that's big money back in.
So I left, and I went, and I called Steamboat, and I called Sherry Martel, and I called Animal, and I called Rick Rude, and I called everybody I'd known, perfect, guys that had worked in top spots up there, and asked them, and they said, that's what he told us when we got rich. So I let my guard down, and I signed the contract. And even while I was signing it, Steve, there was something in my stomach that didn't feel right. I think it was in large part I didn't want to leave ECW. And after I signed, we started going into this whole character development thing for the Dean Douglas character, which didn't fit.
Explain to me the pitch about the Dean Douglas character.
The pitch for the Dean Douglas character was Vince and he used several specific examples of guys' work. He was showing me videotape, and he said, so you can see here, Bret Hart said he's the best is, was, never will be, but he won't grapevine the leg except on the finish. And he went through about 6 or 7 different guys. He was noticing the work not being up to snuff in certain places. And he said he wanted to use the Dean Douglas character to sort of tongue-in-cheek point it out to the guys that tighten their work up. And, I certainly saw no problem with it. I have no problem with somebody pointing out that I'm doing something wrong in the ring. In fact, I prefer it so I can fix it. And he allowed me, before I signed the contract, that I could give legitimate grade, A, B, C, D, and F. And where the Dean Douglas character came from was I stood in the conference room with my shirt off and stood there and slowly turned in a circle, and they're looking at my resume, and they said, you're a teacher, okay, you're a dean, you're the world's smartest man, 7 PhDs. Now, stuff that, to me, where wrestling started going off that gave rise to ECW in the first place was it had gone to cartoon land. And guys like me and you, let's face it, we're not going to watch a cartoon, but we'll sure as hell go watch 2 guys beat the snot out of each other. And that's where the Dean Douglas character was originally conceived. Once implemented, there was one incident where I was doing vignettes for several months before I went on the road. And we were at the studio one Sunday on like the 6th vignette all day long, going over and over and over the wordings, the promos, and the grades, and costume changes, and makeup fixes, and everything. And on the 6th one, I had gotten done. I was just bored out of my skull, Steve, because he wanted the Dean character to speak in a monotone voice. The reason being, he had told me that he once had a teacher in 8th grade that talked like that, and it drove him nuts.
Right.
And I said to him, the difference, Vince, is you couldn't leave that classroom, but people today can channel surf. And this guy's boring; they won't want to watch him. And on the 6th one, I asked him if I could do the last one over again, using the exact same verbiage, just a little different delivery. And he said, okay. So I did. Now, the room had, how you've been up there a lot more than me, but they had a room full of people, cameramen, soundmen, the makeup girls, the hair guy people, the Michael Hayes and Stan Lane were in there, Jim Ross was in there, well over a dozen people. And I did the last one, but I did it as a franchise. Same exact verbiage, same grade, pounding my fist on the podium, laughing, scratching my hand on the board. And right as I finished it, Vince got called out of the room on a phone call. So I pulled the room, Jim Ross. I started with Michael Hayes because Michael was a pretty good stick guy. And I said, what do you think of that last one, kid? Was hot. And everybody in the room, every single person in that room, as Vince was gone, Jim Ross included, told me that the last one that I had done was much better, far more compelling.
Right.
So Vince comes back in with a cup of coffee and his glasses down on his nose, and I said, what do you think, Vince? He looked around the room and said, well, I appreciate what you were trying to do, but, and he gave a long, pregnant pause, he said, but I think I like my way better. What's everybody else think? And every person in the room who 5 minutes before told me my way was better sided with Vince and agreed with Vince. And it was that day that I realized I had to get out of there. I knew it was la-la land for me.
Right.
But, you mentioned the click earlier. When I went up there, my guard was completely down because Shawn Michaels and I, especially, 5.5 years before that, me, Shawn, Marty, and Dustin Rhodes, we were like the four amigos. Where one of us was, we all four were. We were inseparable on the road. We traveled together, and how that goes when you're on the road back then together. Very good friends, very close. And Razor had traveled with me and Johnny in WCW when we were there, and rarely had money to pitch in for the rental car, for gas. We would always take care of it. And, so I go up there. To me, you were my friend the last time we spoke 15, 12 years ago, whatever it's been, and you're my friend today. And 5 years from now, if something's turned around, no problem. I mean, that's the way I am. And so I went up there with my guard completely dropped, and very quickly started realizing that this faction was against me. And there was an incident that happened in Montreal at the Molson Center. Pierre, what's his name, Carl Ouellet.
Yeah.
Had worked, the house was way down, had been down for several months. And he had poured in a lot of local favors, done a lot of local promotion, and had the house way up, and they had him working on top with Kevin Nash in the main event. And it was one of the first days I was on the road. And I walked down, remember how you walk down the ramp, and there were two dressing rooms on the left. At the bottom is where the Zamboni machine was, and the Canadiens dressed on the other side of that. As I went to walk into one of those rooms, Shawn grabbed me by the shirt and said, no, you dress with us. And so I followed them down into the room. And as I'm getting dressed, right in front of me, Kevin asked Shawn what he should do. That Vince wanted a hot finish so that they could do a comeback. And Shawn got up in his face and he said, no, fuck that, you're the champion. When you worked with the champion, did you put the champion over clean? He said, well, yeah, but he said, no, but. He said, you're the champion. That motherfucker should put you over clean. Jackknife, 1, 2, 3. So he turns to walk out, and as he does, Carlton's walking in. And this is happening 4 feet in front of me.
Right.
Shawn does this turnaround and comes up behind Carl, standing right behind Carl's blind in one eye.
Right.
Standing right behind Carl, and he's pantomiming behind Carl's head, Jackknife, 1, 2, 3. And Kevin finally reluctantly says that, and Carl says, no, we can't do that. It's kind of a finish, it's a comeback. And he leaves, and that night at the hotel we were staying at the Days Inn, they called me down into the room. As they were walking in, me and PJ were, just incredible, were in the very first room right off the front lobby. And they were walking in behind us. They said, hey, we're going to be down in the room getting pizza and beer. We're going to talk to you. So I went down and they asked me, what I thought about what happened in the building. And I said, well, it makes sense. Can't do a comeback if you do a clean finish. And, I want to say it was Shawn, said, see, I told you, Shane knows the business. I thought that's not how we do things here. We should, you put the champion over clean here. And then there was all kind of, bad comments being thrown around about Carl. And then one of them said, let's call Vince and have him starve him for the next 3 years. It disgusted me. And it wasn't long after that because like I said, it's nice on me. And I was only too happy to leave. Like I said, after the day of the vignettes and the promos, I knew that it wasn't the place for my type of character, and that I wasn't going to be allowed to unleash what I could unleash as a heel. So, I was only too happy to leave and go back to ECW.
So what did you put in for your notice, or they just the contract expired? What'd you do?
No, I had signed a 2-year deal, and there was remember when they used to do Raw, they'd shoot an hour tape,
Yep.
and they'd go live at 9:00. Davey Boy Smith was in the ring about 20 till 9, and Razor and I put my notice in and was working out a notice, and Razor, Vince wanted me to work a 2-month notice or something. I kept on 2 weeks, and we settled on like a month and a half or something. And Davey Boy, remember how Davey Boy would, like, when he threw his headbutts or punches or whatever, he'd stomp with both feet.
Yeah.
And about 20 to 9, he's in the ring with somebody, and he goes to headbutt them, and he sinks to the mats up to his knees. Well, about 30 guys converge on the ring. We got 9:00, we're going live, and Razor and I are the first match in the ring after they go live. They converge on the ring, tear it down, throw it back together, but they finish it literally as the pyro's going off for the 9:00 start. So we got onto the ring. It's never been tested. Nobody's been in the ring. Ray's just that spot where he blocks your punch, hit you, you came off the ropes, he'd follow you and clothesline you to the floor. Well, when we went to do that, I went to push, I know where the fulcrum point for the rope is with my elbow. I went to push down to go over, and I didn't clean the rope. I was balancing on the rope, and he shoved me to clear me over the rope.
Right.
As I'm going down, upside down on the other side towards the floor, it felt like he football punted me in the middle of the back. And when I went to get up, my legs, they weren't paralyzed, but they weren't going. I was telling me, I'd tell me I needed to come up to my front, and then my leg was going over to the side. I couldn't get up. And the referee comes to the ropes, I forget what it was, and says, get in the fucking ring. I said, I can't, my legs ain't fucking working. And Razor came out and took care of me, honestly, for the rest of the match. Vince wanted the Razor's Edge finish, and he wanted me to small. I said, no, Vince wants to finish, give it to me. And he laid me down as easily as he could, but it felt like I was going to crap out my kidneys.
Right.
And I get back to the dressing room of the Richmond Coliseum after crawling on my elbows from the curtain all the way back to the dressing room. Asked a bunch of guys in the office and everything. No, one person said, can I help you? It's saying, look like you're having a little trouble there.
Yeah.
And I made it back to the dressing room. Dustin was in the dressing room with me, and he went to open the doors as I was trying to come in, and he went, oh, shit, and helped me up and went and got an EMT. And the EMT told me that he thought I had a muscle spasm in my back, which turned out to be a broken bone in my back. And luckily my attorney had negotiated a clause into the contract. They had a clause in there that said that I couldn't sue even in cases of negligence. And he laughed at that and changed it with their blessing, saying that I couldn't sue except in cases of negligence. And so there was enough legal wiggle room that there could have been a lawsuit, breaking my back in the ring. I just wanted my unconditional release. I wanted the hell out of that place.
Gotcha.
My hat's off to all you guys that were able to make it up there, because I couldn't traverse it. I just I couldn't tolerate the insanity that was that place when I was there.
All right, let's give big ups to Geico for being a loyal sponsor of the Steve Austin Show. Go to geico.com, and in 15 minutes, you can be saving 15% or more on car insurance. That's right. Save hundreds of dollars on car insurance at geico.com. Extra money in your pocket? It may just be the most rewarding thing you do today. All right, everybody, give me the go-home cue. It's time to wrap up this podcast right off in the sunset. Send me comments, questions, or whatever to question@steveaustonshow.com. If you've got somebody you want me to interview or something you want me to talk about, I'll check my email and respond accordingly. Appreciate it. Hey, best damn IPA on the planet is Broken Skull IPA at El Segundo Brewing Company. You can find Broken Skull IPA at Whole Foods and Total Wines if you live in California. And if you ain't in California, but you're over there in Massachusetts, Broken Skull IPA has arrived from El Segundo Brewing Company. Also, Mayberry IPA and Citra. Check out those three badass beers. They're over in Massachusetts right now. Go to the El Segundo Brewing Company website, click on the interactive map on the Broken Skull IPA, and find a location near you that carries that beer. Also, stay tuned. Heads up, New York and New Jersey, we are headed your way. Shortly, we'll be there in October. Check a location. It will be on the map to find a store near you to check out what I call the best IPA in America. And don't forget, the King of Attitude shirts are available now at the Pro Wrestling Tees store. Check out ProWrestlingTees.com/Steve Austin for these badass shirts, along with all of my other Broken Skull Ranch apparel. And if you're looking to get either the Cold Steel Broken Skull knife or the Working Man's knife, you can get them at my Amazon store. Amazon's got the best price on both knives. Just go to Amazon.com/shop/Steve Austin, or go directly to the Cold Steel Knives website and check out all their badass sharp objects and other things that they make. And if you see me out there in the trails, you will see me proudly riding a Kawasaki. I want to say one more thank you to all the fine sponsors of the Steve Austin Show, especially Fox, Zorro.com, Roman, Geico, and BetOnline.ag. That's how I'm able to do this podcast for you twice a week for free. Please support them because they support us. If you need more info on my sponsors, check out the show description to this episode for details. Folks, I am on social media, Twitter and Instagram, at Steve Austin BSR. Till next time, my name is Steve Austin, and I will catch your ass down the road.
Download new episodes of Steve Austin Unleashed every Thursday at PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.